If you want to make your way back to your seats. I don't know about you, but I always kind of like stuff like that. It's fun to see the kids up there. I don't know that I paid attention at all to what they were singing. It was just the fact that they were singing. I was smiling the whole time. But pretty fun. Just want to put out there right now something to be thinking about. Today is our Angel Tree Delivery Day. So after the service, we're going to need 7 families or groups who are willing to take some presents and deliver them to a local family. This is a family who one of the parents is incarcerated, which is, if you know that kind of a circumstance, there are so many difficulties that come with that. And so this is a way that we can both serve that family and serve the incarcerated parent, because basically we bring the gifts on behalf of that parent. And it's a way to just love on people in our community, connect with them for a short period of time. And so if you're up for that, just be thinking about that after service, and Melissa will give you guys directions once we get there. In the meantime, though, we are going to keep rolling on this Outlining the Story series. We are almost done. We are almost finished with the Old Testament and the broad brushstroke that we've been on, looking at kind of the main themes of the Old Testament. We started way back in creation with us being created, us being given a purpose and a reason for living, a reason for being, which is to reflect God, to be in His image, reflect His character. We failed at that task pretty monumentally. We spent the next 1,700 years failing at that task over and over and over again until we have this true condemnation of mankind that said every intention of their hearts was evil all the time. And so God wipes out all the bad people, leaves the one good guy and his family, and you think, hey, this is going to be the way to go. We've got rid of all the bad people, but we find out pretty quickly that we are the bad people, and so sin just continues to grow, and we see failure over and over and over again. We saw God beginning to lay out sort of His redemption plan for mankind through this man Abraham and his family. And He created this relational covenant with them in which they would be His people. He would be their God. They would hold to this contract, and He would hold to the contract, and things would go well for them. We find out pretty quickly that they're very unfaithful to that contract, and it seems like the more specific God got about the terms of the contract, like this is all that you need to do is this list of things, the more failure we saw over and over and over again. And so the people decide, hey, you know what? I think the solution is going to be some kings. Let's just bring in kings. All the other nations have kings. If we just have some kings, we will be good. We will be set straight and things will go well. We see that being a very, very bad idea. The vast majority of the kings were very bad guys who caused the people to break the covenant over and over and over again. And even the good guys were really bad guys, right? We saw that. So what we have through that time is this beginning of this hint of this new covenant, right? This new deal, this new contract. And a contract that will be a fixed forever contract because it will not be dependent on humans. It will be dependent on God's work in humans, right? That He would transform our hearts. He'd put a new heart in us. He'd put a new spirit in us. He would write His own words on the deepest part of ourselves. He would give us His own spirit to empower us and cause us to remain committed to Him and to give our hearts fully to Him and follow Him fully. And it would all be based on what He's doing in and through us, right? The only question that remains, and I'm glad it's the only question that remains because I said we'd finish this by the end of the year, and we're going to finish it by the end of the year, which is this. How will this new covenant come about? How will it occur? When will it occur? Who will ratify this covenant? Who will bring this better covenant into existence? We saw throughout this time of covenant making that God made a covenant with Abraham, and then he made a covenant through Moses, right? And we didn't talk a lot about this, but there was a covenant that he made with David. And so who's the guy? Who's the one who's going to bring this about? Who's the one who is going to ratify this contract? We're going to take a look at that guy today. Let me pray for us. Lord, we are thankful to be together. We are so thankful for cute little kids that we get to enjoy, watch singing your praises. We are just so thankful for this time of year that is just unlike any other time of year. And I think that's intentional on your part, that you've created this as a really special time in our calendar, because we get to reflect on what you did in sending your son. Help us this morning to just get a glimpse of how the sending of your son was just part of this larger plan, and that really all of human history had been pointing toward this moment, and just see how it fits into the larger picture. I pray that whatever you want to teach us this morning, however you want to change our thinking and our lives, that you would do that, and that you would be the true teacher this morning. Pray this all in your name. Amen. So, like we did last week, we're going to rewind a little bit to the beginning of the covenant, because the hints of this guy who was to come happens very, very early. Jan, I don't have control. It's possible you might have clicked away. You just got to click back up there. Perfect, I have control. All right, so we saw in Genesis chapter 12 when Yahweh is making this covenant with Abraham, right? He says, I will make you into a great nation, which we saw him do that, right? I will bless you, which we saw very clearly in Abraham's life. He was a blessed man. That he would make him famous, right? He would make his name great, and he would be a blessing to others. We saw this in Abraham's life. He became very well known. He was very, very wealthy, and he shared that wealth with the people that were around him. We saw that in the life of Lot, right? He says, I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you, I will curse you. We saw this throughout Abraham's life. In fact, the next few chapters after this is just God describing how he's doing this. He's blessing those who bless Abraham, and he's cursing those who curse Abraham. He's causing things not to go well for those who didn't treat Abraham well. And so all of these things, we see God as the covenant keeper, right? As the one who fulfills his promises. But then he ends it with this phrase. He says, and in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. What's interesting is we don't see this in Abraham's lifetime. We don't see this in Isaac's lifetime. We don't see this in Jacob's lifetime. We don't see this when we have Israel in Egypt. We don't see this when we have Israel coming out of Egypt and then eventually entering the land. We don't see this. We don't see all the nations of the earth being blessed. We don't see this during the time of the judges and that kind of cycle of perpetual doing evil and then God rescuing the people. We don't see this. We don't see this at any time during the kings, in which all the nations of the earth are blessed through this country. In fact, the nation of Israel and eventually the northern and the southern kingdom of Israel and Judah are actually very small as far as it comes to world affairs at that time. There were much larger kingdoms doing much greater things. And so this promise that is made to Abraham is unfulfilled for hundreds of years. So when is this going to be fulfilled? Well, we start to get a hint of this in 2 Samuel, in the life of David. That's what 2 Samuel 7 says. It says, Yahweh also declared to you that Yahweh will make a house for you. He's speaking to David. When your days are finished and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Then down to 16, your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. Now, what's interesting here is you have him talking to David and saying, David, I'm going to establish a house for you. And in fact, your son is going to become king, which wasn't an automatic thing. If you remember, David wasn't Saul's son, right? So it wasn't an automatic thing that David's son would be the next king, but he says he will be the next king, and he will also build a house for me. He's talking about the temple. But he says something very strange in this whole setup, right? He says, he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. Any Sandlot fans in here? Forever, right? Yeah. That was how long the beast was going to be chained up. But anyway, forever, right? How does that work? How does it work that David's house would be established forever, that his throne would be established forever and ever? In fact, before David, David's great grandfather, Judah, was told this. It says, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. That this ruling, reigning part of Judah would rule and reign forever and would never depart. Now, the problem is that you have this line of kings, right? We talked about it when we were talking about the kings. We have this line of kings that happen, and it would actually seem to prove this prophecy to kind of be bunk and not real. Because there is a point at which David's kingly line ends. There is a last king who sits on the throne of David. And then for hundreds of years, there is no Davidic king on the throne. So what's happening here? Well, let's look at Jeremiah 33. It says, behold, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I will fulfill the good word which I have spoken concerning the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will make a righteous branch of David sprout. So we might read this, having seen the kings that come after David, and we've talked about those kings, and we're going, oh, great, another Davidic king. Those guys are bums, right? They're not doing the right thing ever. So why do we want another Davidic king to come up? But what's interesting about this is he says it is a righteous king. I will cause a righteous branch of David to sprout. Well, that's different. And he shall execute justice and righteousness on the earth. Well, that's different. Because when we look at the Davidic line, we saw all of this failure, right? Over and over and over again, these covenant-breaking kings who were a mess, who were murderers and charlatans, and they were just bad dudes who were puffed up with their own importance, self-importance. But there will be a branch of David, this new ruler, that will be like no other ruler in history. A truly righteous ruler. A truly just ruler. Which fulfills what Yahweh wanted for the people from the very beginning. If you remember back in Genesis, we talked about this idea. He says, for I have chosen him, he's talking about Abraham, I've chosen Abraham so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing what? Righteousness and justice. This was the whole purpose for the nation of Israel to exist, is that they would learn the righteousness and justice as defined by Yahweh, true righteousness, true justice, and they would live that out, and the peoples of the earth would see how amazing Yahweh is. But how good were they at that? Not good at all. But this guy, this sprout, this guy who's coming would bring about righteousness and justice, would truly live Yahweh's way, and would encapsulate Yahweh's righteousness. Ezekiel 37 talks about this guy. It says, "And my servant David will be king over them." Now, he's not talking about David, the actual person, but someone from David's line. "My servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd, and they will walk in my ordinances and keep my statutes and follow them." So the bringing of this king, this Davidic king, would also bring about the people, his people, being shepherded by him in such a way that they would walk in his ordinances, do what he calls them to do, keep his statutes. This is covenant language. Does it sound familiar? We've talked about these things, right? The terms and conditions of the covenant, they would finally be fulfilled when this Davidic king would come to power. Look at 25. It says, "And they will live on the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, in which your fathers lived, and they will live on it, they and their sons sons forever. And my servant David will be their leader forever." Forever. Look at 26. "And I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant with them. And I will place them and multiply them and set my sanctuary in their midst forever. My dwelling place also will be among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. And the nations will know that I am Yahweh, who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forever." Yahweh, when this king comes, will cause his people to walk in his ways, which is very different than the history of Israel up to this point, right? Yahweh will institute this new, everlasting, unchangeable covenant. Yahweh will dwell with his people forever and will never, ever leave them. Did Yahweh back away from the covenant with the people at different times in Israel's history? Yeah, all the time, right? When they were unfaithful, he backed off. That was part of the deal, right? And allowed them to be left to their own devices, which was not good. But he says, this new king that will come, he will institute this new covenant, and he will dwell with his people forever, never leave. He will always live in relationship with them. He will always be their God, and they will be his people. And he will govern, he will reign over a sanctified people. Sanctified means a select group. I always think of like the special forces in the military, right? You've got all of these soldiers who are all well-trained, but then you take a select group of them and you bring them off to get special training, special ability, special weapons, right? For a very, very, very special and specific purpose, right? That's the relationship here. That he would have this group that is his group, is his people, and they would be set apart for his purposes within the world. And that's us, right? And who's going to reign over all these people? Who's going to reign over all these changes? This Davidic king, this king of David's line. For those who had experienced such a mess for so long, right? At this point in Israel's history, when they're hearing these things had not gone well for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there's just a long line of failure that came before this. And they were experiencing and living with these consequences of all these failures of the past, being dominated and controlled by other nations for so long. You know, it started with Babylonia and then Persia, and then later on Alexander the Great comes in, and you have these Hellenistic empires where they're dominated by them with just a couple of rebellions that really didn't last long at all. And then you have this Roman Empire that comes in. They're just a dominated, beaten down people, oppressed for so long. And within that oppression, they spent a lot of time on these verses that we just covered, and many more. They longed for this coming one, this one this anointed king who would bring about all of these marvelous changes. The Jewish people and their leaders were really consumed with this guy that they called the the Messiah. In fact, the rabbis at one point assigned 456 different scripture passages in the Old Testament. That's a lot of scripture to this Messiah, this coming one. I don't think that they all apply to the Messiah, but they were so looking forward to his coming. They were consumed with him. In fact, for centuries, there were these communities that would spring up, and they would come together, and they were these messianic communities that were simply focused on this coming one. They were waiting for him. They were seeking him. In fact, if you're familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are an amazing archaeological find that we still benefit a lot from today, those Dead Sea Scrolls came from one of these communities, the Qumran community, which were all about the Messiah and waiting for him and anticipating him. They were dying for this Davidic king to come. The point on your handout, if you want to fill it in, is Yahweh promised an eternal king who would save the people and bring about the realities of the new covenant. Yahweh promised an eternal king who would save the people and bring about the realities of the new covenant. Who is this guy? What's this king going to be like? Isaiah speaks to that a little bit in Isaiah 9. He says, "But there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish." They are in anguish at this time. In earlier times, he treated the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali with contempt. But later on, he will make it glorious by the way of the sea on the other side of the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. Zebulun and Naphtali were two regions of the Northern Empire. And we've talked about the fact that the Northern Empire experienced this mass destruction by the Assyrians. They came in, they exported all the people, and they basically destroyed all of the Northern Kingdom. And this was two of the tribes there. Things were not good in the regions that he's speaking about here. But he says something's going to change in that region. Something's going to change in that area. And in an area that was so oppressed and so dominated for so long, there would actually be something glorious that would come out of that area. Something glorious that would come out of an area called Galilee. Something was going to change. Look at verse 2. The people who are in darkness, who walk in darkness, will see a great light. Those who live in a dark land, the light will shine on them. You will multiply the nation. You will increase their joy. They will rejoice in your presence as with the joy of harvest, as people rejoice when they divide the spoils. Where darkness was, there's going to be light. Where only sadness had been, there was going to be a multiplication of joy. And it would expand beyond that region. It will be like a harvest day or a divide the spoils day, which we can't relate to that. We don't really have harvest days or divide the spoils day. We don't have some sort of army general rolling into Red Bluff from time to time with a bunch of spoils from a war and like, hey, take this, here's gifts for you, right? Being like Santa Claus. That's not what we do, but that's what they did, right? To me, what he's describing here is a little bit like Christmas morning for a 5-year-old, right? They walk in and there's all these presents and they're like, oh, their eyes get big. They're like, woo, this is really good. That's what he's talking about. It's like, woo, this is going to be great. Where there's only been darkness, there's going to be like Christmas morning. It's going to be so good. Well, why? How's it going to be? Look at verse 4. He says, for you will break the yoke of their burden and the staff on their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, as at the battle of Midian. For every boot of the marching warrior will roar, of the marching warrior in the roar of the battle, and cloak rolled in blood will be for burning, fuel for the fire. A yoke and a staff represent oppression, deep oppression. And he describes this scene that actually comes out of the book of Judges, where Midian had come in because, again, the people had done evil. We had talked about that. They did evil, so Midian comes in. They dominate this area of of Israel. And for 7 years, Midian just came in and would destroy their crops. They would leave them no produce. They would destroy all their livestock, leave them no meat. So they basically had no food, right? It was deep, deep oppression. Before they cry out to Yahweh after 7 years, and he provides Gideon, if you're familiar with that story. And he says it's going to be like the battle of Midian, where it just completely, the oppressors are going to be wiped out. Soldiers' boots will actually, that were meant for walking into battle, will just be thrown away. Why? There won't be a need for that anymore, because he's going to bring peace. Cloaks rolled in blood, cloaks that have been out in battle for many, many, many years, can just be tossed into the fire because you won't need them anymore. It's peace. Something is coming from Galilee that is going to set everything right. So the question is, what is that something? It sounds like a pretty amazing, warrior king, right? Who's going to make this thing happen. What's that something going to look like? Look at verse 6. For a child will be born to us. A son will be given to us. What? That doesn't sound right. The glorious thing that was going to come from Galilee, that was this light that was going to penetrate the darkness, this thing that was going to bring exponential joy to the people, the oppression breaker and the war ender and the peace bringer is going to be a child. And this child, this son, the government will rest upon his shoulders. He will be the government, is what this means. He will have all dominion and rule and power and authority. Well, in this time, who had all dominion, power, and authority? A king, right? A child king would come. And look at this. Love this. And his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. The name of someone was not just, my name's Nate. It wasn't just some, 4-letter moniker that you put on someone. It represented the character of the person, how they are known to people, right? Their reputation among people. These people would call him because his name would be Wonderful. He'd be a marvel, a wonder, miraculous, absolutely amazing. And not only amazing in his person, but an amazing counselor, an amazing advisor. This word can also mean expert. It's like someone you go to for counsel. It's one whose thoughts are sought out and valued and listened to. And he's sought out and valued and listened to because his thoughts and his words are miraculous. His thoughts and his words will be so amazing that everyone will want to seek and hear him. I think we know someone like that. He will be mighty, the one with intense power. This word is almost exclusively used in regards to military might. A mighty God. Well, that's strange. I thought we were talking about a child, right? Isn't it a child who's supposed to come out of Galilee? Why would he be called Mighty Elohim? Mighty God? Well, because this child would both be human and would be fully the one true God. Well, that's different. And people would recognize him as this. My Lord, my God. Right? This child king would be eternal, ongoing, continual. Literally, the idea of eternal is outside of time. It's like if you studied much in geometry of line segments and lines and all that stuff, a line is represented by a straight line with 2 arrows on the end, right? You guys familiar with this? And those arrows indicate what? Continuous, right? Unending, does not stop. That's this. This doesn't make sense. All humans die. No humans are continual, unending. No humans are eternal beings. Why is he going to be eternal? Well, he's God, right? This child is going to be God. He's going to be eternal. And he's not only eternal, but he's eternal Father. Now, this word father means father. It can mean grandfather. It can mean great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. It just means ancestor, the one who came before me, the progenitor of me, right? I wouldn't exist without the line of people before me who created the line before me and then eventually created me, right? But what's interesting about this is that he's eternal progenitor. He's eternal Father. He goes as far back as you can go. He's the start. He's the beginning. I was going to say the beginner. That's a word, right? Beginner. That's right. There you go. Beginner. He's the beginner, right? This child's going to be something special, something strange, something different. He's the eternal Father. He's my eternal ancestor. It's different. He will be the Prince of Peace. Prince is someone in charge. It can mean, it's not just royalty, but it can mean captain, commander, governor, overseer. He's going to be the governor, the overseer of a land called peace. Now, what's interesting about this word peace is that this is a very, very important word in the Jewish people's language. It's the word shalom. It's more than peace. It is peace, but it's really prosperity. Probably the best word I think to describe it is wholeness. It's someone who is whole. It's being whole, being complete, having everything that I need, being fully satisfied in a given moment. That's shalom. Lacking nothing. And that's why the Jewish people wish this on one another. They want that wholeness for one another, right? He says this child is going to be the boss of the land of shalom, in charge of the land of wholeness, where if you live there, you are whole. You will lack nothing. You will be fully satisfied and complete. And if you want in on that, and I know I want in on that, we got to seek this child, the prince of this land. Look at verse 7. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of Yahweh of armies will accomplish this. Where will this king's borders end? They won't. Where will his reach end? Where will be right beyond his reach? Nowhere. Whose throne will he sit on? David's throne. It's important. Will this country that he has all the power over, will it be just? Yes. Will it be right? Yes. All kingdoms throughout history have risen and fallen. Any kingdom you can describe has risen and fallen, risen and fallen, risen and fallen. His kingdom, never. It has risen and will remain. And why? Because Yahweh is the one who's going to get it done, right? Sounds pretty good. I want to know this guy. Point on your handout, if you want to fill it in, is the saving king would be human and yet also God. He would set right everything that is wrong and would bring wholeness to his people. This saving king would be human and yet also God. He would set right everything that is wrong and would bring wholeness to his people. Now, as you can tell, the news of this king is positive, is very positive. Generally, always a positive thing that's being talked about. Anytime this servant, this Messiah, this coming one, this anointed one comes up in scriptures, it's always, always, always this really, really, really positive thing. Except that sometimes there are some prophecies concerning the cost of what it will take to secure this outcome that this king wants. Isaiah, who speaks a lot about the Messiah, in fact, we've looked at some of that, he prophesies it for a bit about the destruction of Judah, the doom of Judah, bad things are going to happen. He's trying to prepare the people for their captivity. At that point, there was no turning back. They were going to be captured. But then starting in Isaiah 40, he starts talking about Judah's restoration, okay, this coming back, this redeeming of the nation. And by chapter 42, he starts talking about this guy called the servant, Yahweh's servant, the one who will come and bring this true restoration, this true justice and righteousness. He will be the light to the nations, open blind eyes, free captives, bring salvation to the whole earth. All good stuff. We're not going to look at all that, but it's all good. But then it kind of turns in chapter 53. It says this: who has believed our report about this, all the great things that are going to happen when he comes? And to whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no stately form or majesty that we would look at him, nor an appearance that we would take pleasure in him. This one who was to come, this Messiah, this servant of Yahweh, is not one who would be impressive to look at. I know if I was on a basketball court getting ready to play a basketball game and LeBron James showed up, just his presence on the court, we'd go, yeah, I want that guy, right? Because he's impressive to look at, like especially on a basketball court. That's the guy I want on my team, right? Yahweh's servant, not impressive. No one's first pick. No one would just look at him and go, yeah, I want that guy. I think he's the one. Yahweh's servant on the surface would not be impressive. Now, we might think, okay, maybe once people got to know this unimpressive person, there would be a mass embrace of him. Because remember, he's going to do all this amazing stuff, right? Look at verse 3. He was despised and abandoned by men, a man of great pain and familiar with sickness. The word there is really suffering, a man of suffering. And like one whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we had no regard for him. The life of this one who was to bring about all of this great stuff, his life would be a life of rejection. His life would be a life of abandonment. His life would be a life of pain and suffering. And it would be so bad that most people couldn't even look at his pain and suffering. When I think about this passage, I always think of the movie The Passion of the Christ. Gets familiar with that? I actually showed it here a few years ago, or parts of it. That's one of those movies that I can't watch the whole thing. There are just points at which I have to turn my face away. I just can't look. It is so horrifying. And honestly, I believe that they didn't even go far enough in that movie. And that it's horrific, right? Can't even look at it. The life of this man would suffer so greatly that people would turn their faces away, couldn't even watch. Couldn't even see what was going to happen to this guy. And we might think, before I go, we might think, you know what? It sounds like this guy is going to lead this suffering, this life of suffering and pain, and things are not going to go well for them. And it's probably because of his own actions, right? Especially in their time, they would have thought this way. If you're familiar with some of these passages in which you have a lame person who Jesus eventually heals, and with one guy they say, well, was it his parents' fault or his own fault that he's lame? Because this was their perspective, right? All pain and suffering in life has to be someone's fault. Either that person's fault or it's probably their parents. Because if he's lame from birth, obviously it's not his fault, it's his mom's fault. Right? She did something wrong. Or his dad's fault. He did something wrong. And so in their minds, they would have thought, yeah, probably the suffering came from his behavior. When you see someone walking down Antelope Boulevard who looks disheveled and maybe just looks like they're living a wreck of a life. And a lot of times I go, yeah, that's drug abuse, right? That's the drugs have caused that person to so deteriorate that's why they look that way. And while I have compassion for them, and I do, I just want to help them, right? There's also this sense that they got themselves into that situation too, right? Maybe that's the situation here. Look at verse 4. However, it was our sickness. It was our suffering, is the word there. Our suffering that he himself bore. Our pains that he carried. Yet we ourselves assume that he had been afflicted. He had been struck down by God. He had been humiliated because it's obviously, that's what happens, right? It's his fault. When people get punished, it's because they deserve being punished. He's like, no. It's our suffering that he bore. Our pains that he carried. Look at verse 5. He was pierced for our offenses. He was crushed for our wrongdoings. The punishment of our well-being was laid upon him. And by his wounds, we are healed. Doesn't make any sense. He's wounded. He's beaten. He's punished. He's whipped for our crimes, our misconduct. And not only was it what we deserved, but by receiving what we deserved, he secures for us our well-being. So that we could recover from the mess we put ourselves in. It's crazy. All of this positive result of this one who was to come, this Davidic king who was going to bring a light into the darkness and all things were going to be well, was going to bring shalom to his people. So good, it has to be secured by his suffering. By his receiving the punishment we deserve. Now we might say, you know what? Yeah, he's going to have to suffer. Yeah, he's going to have to go through that. But that can't be my suffering he's receiving. He has to be receiving that for all kind of the bad people in the world, right? The ones who really deserve all that punishment. I don't deserve all that punishment. It's the bad guys. Look at verse 6. All of us. By the way, I did some deep Hebrew study of the word all here. Guess what it means? All of us. Every one of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Every one of us, each one of us, has turned to his and her own way. But Yahweh has caused the wrongdoing of us all to fall on him. This is literally the story of human history. This is literally what all of human history was pointing towards, was preparing for. Right? He gave us the ability to choose so that we would choose him. And what did we choose? We chose ourselves. We chose selfishness. We chose sin. We chose unrighteousness. He offered us covenant relationship with him. And did we choose to stay in that covenant relationship with him? No, we blew it over and over and over. We were just unfaithful people. He offered us only good gifts. And we repeatedly chose the lesser things of this world. And it's the story of all of human history. And it's the story of your history and my history, right? Not a couple of us, not a few of us, not one of us, but all of us. So, verse 7, he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living for the wrongdoing of my people, to whom the blow was due. While his generation looked at him and went, yeah, he deserves this, that heretic. Those same people who were judging him and condemning him to death were the same people who deserved to be up on that cross. And he did it for them. And he did it for us. The very people who justified his condemnation were the ones who deserved his condemnation. We were the ones who deserved condemnation themselves. The victory that this great king, this child king, was coming to secure for all mankind would not come through victory in battle. It would not come through him flexing his mighty power, which he had, but it would come through undeserved pain and persecution and suffering and death. The point on your handout, if you want to fill it in, is the victory of this king would be secured through pain, rejection, suffering, and death. Through the pain, rejection, suffering, and death that was meant for the people. I've got a quote. Actually, I guess it's two quotes at the bottom of your handout. I just love that when this coming one came to do what he was appointed to do, what he came to do, that the first person that he announced who he was to, the first time he says, I am the Messiah, I am the one that's been waited for, was a non-Jewish woman who had a mess of a life, right? But she was one who had always been looking for the Messiah, as had all the Israelites and many other Abrahamic religions, which she was a part of, one of those, had been looking for this Messiah figure to come. We're desperate for it, right? And the first person he chooses to announce that to is this unknown Samaritan woman. We still don't know anything about her other than this story. She said this, she says, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Jesus responds, I am the Messiah. I'm the one you've been looking for. I'm the one the Jews have been looking for. And whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not, he's the one that the world had been searching for and is still searching for today. Let me pray for us. Lord, we're so thankful. We are so thankful that you are the King. So thankful that you are of David's line, that you came as a light in the darkness. There is so much darkness. That you came as a light in this darkness. That you came in the meekest form you could come in as a child. that you came to secure victory over the harshness of this world, the harshness of our reality. And I'm so thankful that you secured it even though it required such deep sacrifice on your part. You didn't have to come, but you chose to come so that I could have life, that we could have life. Thank you for coming so many years ago to save us from our oppression that is self-inflicted. Thank you for taking on the wounds that were meant for ourselves and buying us back and redeeming us to yourself. And thank you for securing this everlasting covenant in which we can be just secure in it, completely secure in it, because it is unchanging. It is forever. Thank you for being that kind of a God to us. In your name, amen.